The storm grounded every pilot, except one. When 5 Marines were trapped behind enemy lines, Hannah Cole took the sky alone. What followed was a flight so daring, no one believed she'd survive, let alone return. This is the story of a lone pilot, a deadly storm, and a rescue mission no one believed could succeed. Stay with us as we follow Hannah Cole's impossible flight. And let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The storm was already building before the briefing even began. Outside the hangar, thick gray clouds crept over the Afghan mountains like a slow, coiled predator. The kind of storm no pilot wanted to see on the radar, let alone fly into. But for Captain Hannah Cole, the storm wasn't the problem. The problem was time. 5 Marines. Pinned. And they won't survive the night without air cover. The words hung heavy in the operations room. Colonel Mason's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed something else, uncertainty. A digital map on the wall pulsed with red indicators, showing a remote ravine deep in enemy-controlled territory. An extraction team had been ambushed, forced to shelter in a narrow wadi with little cover, flanked by enemy fighters, and no viable ground route out. All roads are compromised, said one of the intel officers, sliding a satellite image onto the screen. They've got drones watching the ridgelines. Only way in is over the top. And that was when the room went quiet. Everyone knew what over the top meant. Through the storm. Through narrow mountain passes. Through winds that could rip rotors off helicopters and sand so thick it blinded sensors. An impossible flight. Except Hannah Cole didn't flinch. She stood at the edge of the group, helmet tucked under one arm, her flight suit still dusty from her earlier patrol shift. She was 43 years old, with light skin and sharp brown eyes that had seen their share of war zones. Her brown hair was tied neatly under her cap, but it wasn't her appearance that made people pause when she entered a room, it was the way she watched everything, calculating and calm. Like someone who'd already thought 3 steps ahead. She didn't look like a savior. She didn't need to. Sir, Hannah said quietly, stepping forward. What aircraft is available? Colonel Mason turned. Technically? Nothing. No one's cleared to fly through that cell. The Black Hawks are grounded. And fast movers can't hold in that wind. There was a long pause before he added, but your bird's still fueled. Hannah didn't blink. Then I'll go. Someone scoffed in the back, probably one of the younger officers. Another voice muttered, alone? But Mason silenced them with a look. He'd known Hannah Cole for years, back when she flew medevac runs in the Korangal, through valleys where every shadow held a rifle. She wasn't reckless. She just didn't scare easy. And she didn't ask for backup she knew wouldn't make it. You understand what's waiting in that ravine? Mason asked her quietly. She nodded. 5 Marines. No drama. No speech. Just that. The A-10 Warthog, her bird, sat crouched on the tarmac like a metal beast. Ugly, durable, unforgiving. Pilots called it the flying tank because it could take hits no other aircraft could and still deliver its payload with precision. Hannah loved it for another reason, it didn't need to be pretty. It just needed to survive. Like her. As she walked across the runway, the wind picked up, harsh, hot gusts that whipped dust against her visor. Her crew chief gave her a look, one that said everything words couldn't. You don't have to do this, he said finally. I know, she replied. Then she climbed into the cockpit. Inside, the storm had already begun to rattle the airframe. Visibility was dropping fast, dust sweeping in horizontal waves across the strip. Lightning danced in the distance. Hannah flipped switches with steady hands, her voice calm as she checked in with the tower. Viper 1-1, clear for takeoff. Last chance to abort, Captain. She pressed her thumb to the throttle. Copy, tower. I'll bring them home. And with a roar, the A-10 surged down the runway. In the operations room, Mason stood silently, arms folded, watching the blip disappear from radar. She's alone out there, someone said. No, Mason replied. She's exactly where she needs to be. 30 minutes into the flight, the storm swallowed her whole. Turbulence hit like a fist, throwing the A-10 left, then right. Instruments blinked in protest. Icing warnings flashed. But Hannah's grip never faltered. She'd flown worse. She remembered the mission in Kandahar, dust so thick it choked the intake. The night her controls locked up over Mosul and she'd had to manually override with a bent throttle. The emergency evac she pulled from an ambushed convoy in Helmand, when the sky lit up with tracer fire and she didn't breathe for 4 minutes straight. This was just wind. Below her, the ravine came into view, barely visible through the storm. It was narrow, steep, and choked with smoke. But her HUD picked up something: IR signatures. Huddled heat sources. 5 Marines. Still alive. She keyed the mic. "This is Viper 1-1. I have eyes on. You boys better be ready, because I brought fireworks." Static. Then a voice crackled through. "Goddamn, are we glad to hear you." Captain Hannah Cole sat on the edge of her bunk, lacing up her desert boots with a deliberate calm that barely hid the storm inside her. The canvas walls of the temporary command outpost buzzed with the low hum of radio chatter and distant engines. Outside, a dust devil spiraled across the base, carrying with it the murmur of tension that had gripped the forward operating airstrip for days. She'd flown missions in worse conditions, both on paper and in the skies, but today, she wasn't flying. Again. The printed flight order still sat crumpled in her pocket, a relic of another mission reassigned at the last minute. A younger pilot, male, less experienced, barely out of his last simulator cycle, had taken her seat. Hannah said nothing, as always. Not because she was weak. Because complaining would only confirm what they whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. She's too old school. She's textbook. Precise, not instinctive. She hesitates. Doesn't play politics. The truth was, Captain Hannah Cole didn't play games at all. She was a war-tested combat pilot with over 2,000 hours in A-10 Thunderbolts and a record of clean runs and 0 failed CAS, close air support, calls. But that didn't mean much anymore, not with newer brass favoring younger pilots bred on drones and digital warfare. A knock broke her thoughts. She looked up to see Lieutenant Arjun Bell, his lanky frame silhouetted against the light outside. "They've moved you off tomorrow's rotation too, Cap," he said, voice tinged with awkward sympathy. "Command's sending Morrison and Fallon again." Hannah exhaled slowly. "Thanks, LT." He lingered a second longer. "You know, for what it's worth, half the ground boys still swear by you. Especially the guys from Kandahar." She gave a nod but didn't smile. Kandahar was nearly 5 years ago, an operation where she'd held a gunship orbit alone for 20 minutes to cover a downed Black Hawk under enemy fire. It earned her a medal. It also earned her the label reckless from certain commanders who didn't like the heat her actions brought. When the flap of the tent closed again, Hannah reached under her cot and pulled out a worn leather-bound notebook. She thumbed through the old flight logs, dates scribbled beside crude sketches of terrain and coordinates, handwritten maps of every rescue, every support run. It wasn't nostalgia. It was a quiet act of remembrance. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "You don't fly for the glory, Hannah. You fly for the ones on the ground who can't." He'd been a ground medic in Desert Storm. Lost a leg to shrapnel. Died from lung cancer a few years later, but not before teaching her the value of flying low and close, no matter how loud the bureaucrats upstairs got. She looked out the slit of her tent at the open tarmac. The A-10 sat like sleeping beasts, stubby-nosed, tank-killing legends with ugly lines and thunder in their bellies. Her aircraft, tail number 81185, still bore the painted shark mouth on the nose cone, and though a newer pilot sat in her cockpit now, Hannah still considered that plane part of her. The real pain wasn't about being benched. It was about being slowly erased. Later that evening, during a mission briefing Hannah wasn't required to attend, she stood quietly in the back, arms folded. A dry erase map showed a mountainous terrain with a tight canyon corridor, LZ Sierra. 5 Marine Special Recon operatives had radioed for emergency extraction after their convoy hit an IED. Intel suspected Taliban-aligned fighters closing in fast. "Time is critical," said Major Royce, pointer jabbing the map. "We've got a medevac inbound, but air cover will be delayed unless we scramble something now." Captain Derek Morrison raised a hand. "I'm ready. I've flown the cost pass." Fallon chimed in. "We go together. If they're pinned in the canyon, it's close flying." Royce nodded. "Good. Get them airborne. Wheels up in 15. Hannah opened her mouth to speak, just barely, but stopped herself. Royce glanced her way. A flicker of something in his eyes, maybe disdain, maybe disinterest. "Something to add, Captain?" She straightened. "Just hoping they remember the wind currents over that ridge. It'll kick the nose hard left if they come in too low." Royce didn't reply. Neither did Morrison. She left the tent with a silent exit, her shoulders rigid. That night, as the A-10 streaked off into the twilight, Hannah stood beside her aircraft in silence. She could feel it, not jealousy, but unease. Something didn't sit right. The timing. The extraction window. The unfamiliar terrain with outdated satellite imaging. She'd flown there once, years ago, when a convoy ran into a similar trap. The canyon had a split, one way led to the evac site. The other was a dead end, narrow and steep, with no room for turnaround. And if command hadn't updated their maps. She looked again at tail number 81185. The bird was ready. She could see the pre-dawn mission order sitting on the clipboard in the hangar bay. Empty. No backup assignment. No official permission. Her gut twisted with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Responsibility. Hannah wasn't grounded anymore. She was watching her replacements fly straight into a trap, and she wasn't sure they knew the way out. The storm wasn't a line on a radar anymore. It was a wall. From the cockpit of her HH-60 Pave Hawk, Hannah Cole stared into the advancing mass of black sky and violent sand. The desert below had begun to vanish beneath the rolling edge of a haboob, one of the fiercest sandstorms southern Syria had seen in months. Her hands tightened slightly on the cyclic and collective, steady, but inside she could feel the pounding of her heart echo through her ribs like rotor blades. "Storm fronts moving faster than forecasted," said her co-pilot, Lieutenant Alex Dorsey, over the intercom. His voice was calm, but tight. "Visibility's gonna go to 0 in under 15. They were still 20 minutes from the extraction point. Hannah didn't answer right away. Her eyes scanned the gauges, cross-checked fuel, adjusted the NAV system. "We don't have 15. A heartbeat passed. "Roger that." Back at Gyra Air Base, Command had tried to delay the mission. Sandstorms this strong grounded most flights. But Command wasn't flying through hell to retrieve 5 trapped Marines surrounded by hostiles. Command hadn't listened to the call for help where one of those Marines, his voice cracking, begged for more time, said his friend was bleeding out. Hannah had. They'd launched the second the last resupply helo touched down. No backup. No escort. Just them. And the clock was ticking. 2 hours earlier. The call had come during shift change. Hannah was halfway through her protein bar when the buzz hit the operations floor. A Marine patrol had gone dark during a recon run along the contested Kalat corridor. Syrian paramilitary forces, some loosely tied to Russian contractors, had sprung an ambush. 2 vehicles hit. Comms cut. The last ping coordinates showed them stranded against a rocky ridgeline, 3 clicks from any cover. Hostiles were closing in. Search and rescue options were limited. Jets were grounded by the storm. Drones had already gone dark from the interference. And most of the flight crews were either offline or still hours out. But Hannah Cole was in the hangar, in uniform, and walking toward the Pave Hawk before the briefing officer could finish his sentence. "Solo?" the colonel asked. "No time to wait," she said. "Storm's inbound. I've seen worse." The colonel paused. "You'll be alone out there. Hannah had met his eyes. So are they. He gave a single nod. Now, the desert below had changed. What was once flat, endless terrain was now broken into dunes and stone clusters, the kind that made ambushes a nightmare. Their onboard radar showed the jagged elevation patterns, but the storm was killing contrast fast. 5 clicks to LZ, Alex called. Hannah adjusted course. The wind howled louder, buffeting the chopper. Visibility dropped to the length of a football field, then half that. Sand battered the windshield like a hailstorm. Static crackled through the intercom. Her voice was even. Goggles. Both pilots switched to infrared. The world turned ghostly green. Shapes emerged, cliffs, rock outcrops, movement. There, Hannah pointed. Heat 6, northwest quadrant. 5 clustered. Alex leaned in. Still alive. And surrounded. Hannah's tone dropped. She could make out 4 other shapes circling in a loose formation, cold spots with scattered movement. Getting a signal, faint. Alex adjusted the frequency. A voice crackled through, broken but unmistakable. Lima 3, copy, taking fire, hostiles, not much time. Hannah keyed the mic. Lima 3, this is Vulture 1-1. We're en route. ETA 2 mics. Sit tight. Copy, we see you. 1 down, request immediate evac. Alex muttered, they've been hit again. Hannah's jaw clenched. The storm was now at full strength. Every gauge trembled with turbulence. The rotors screamed against the wind. But she pushed forward. There's no place to land, Alex warned. We're not landing, she said. We're hovering and pulling them fast. As they closed in, gunfire sparked below, small muzzle flashes against the infrared wash. Weapons hot, Alex called out. Hannah nodded. Suppress and cover. I'm getting us down. Extraction. The Pavehawk descended like a thunderbird out of myth. Through sheets of sand and gunfire, it roared into the enemy perimeter, rotor wash throwing grit and gravel in every direction. The Marines below, dirty and bloodied, raised their heads as salvation screamed overhead. One was dragging another, his leg bent the wrong way. Another covered them with the last rounds of his rifle. Alex laid down suppression fire from the side door. Tracers lit the sandstorm like lightning. Return fire pinged off the Pavehawk's armor. The medic, Specialist Kearney, clipped his harness and dropped into the storm, his silhouette briefly swallowed in the chaos. He reached the first Marine and slung him over his shoulder, signaling to the winch. One by one, the survivors were hauled into the bird. The last, Staff Sergeant Ray Gomez, refused to go until everyone else was inside. Get in! Hannah yelled over comms. Last mag. Gomez yelled, still firing into the fog. A shot rang out, close. Then silence. Gomez stumbled back, clutching his side. No. Alex reached out, grabbed him, and yanked him into the cabin just as Hannah pulled up hard. The Pavehawk lifted, lurching in the gale. A final RPG shot whooshed by, missing the tail by inches. The wind carried them upward, over the last ridge, then into the storm's heart. In the silence. 10 minutes later, they broke through. Above the storm, the sky was clear. Blue, quiet, holy. Inside the cabin, the Marines lay slumped, some breathing shallow, others unconscious. Blood on the floor. Sweat on faces. Tears on a few. Hannah kept flying. No words. Just the soft hum of survival. Alex turned to her. You just pulled 5 men out of hell. Hannah said nothing. She just gripped the controls, eyes ahead. They weren't home yet. But they would be. The radio crackled as Hannah's A-10 Thunderbolt II cut a low path through the canyon. The storm behind her howled with fury, but her mind was calm. She had locked onto a mission most had called impossible, and she was halfway there. Below, the vast terrain had become even more hostile. The last known coordinates of the Marines placed them near the edge of the ridgeline, a zone now crawling with enemy scouts. The second Hannah dipped lower for visual recon. Tracer rounds stitched the air in front of her. "Contact, South Ridge," she muttered, adjusting the stick. Her voice was flat, controlled. She banked left, hugging the canyon wall. Her helmet's HUD painted red silhouettes across the terrain, at least 10 hostiles, light artillery, and one mounted heavy weapon. "Hog 1, this is Watchtower," came a strained voice in her headset. It was Lieutenant Barrera from Ops. "You are entering contested airspace. We recommend abort, repeat, abort." Hannah keyed her mic. "Watchtower, those Marines are still alive. I've got thermal flickers south of grid Delta 7. I'm going in. They don't have time." A pause. Then a reluctant, "Copy, Hog 1. Be advised, you're solo. All other assets grounded." She smirked. Wouldn't have it any other way. With a deep breath, she dropped altitude, the Warthog's engines howling like a beast awakened. Her thumb flicked over the weapon systems, her 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon spun to life. Below, the enemy team scrambled as they spotted the low-flying jet. They weren't expecting an A-10 to come this close, not in this weather, not alone. Hannah engaged. The cannon erupted with thunder, sending rounds slicing through sandbags and weapons emplacements. The enemy's heavy gun burst in a ball of sparks and smoke, followed by 2 smaller tents going up in flames. Shockwaves rattled through the ground. She swung wide, looped once, then came in from the opposite direction. Back at base, silence fell over the comms room. Even Patterson leaned forward in his chair, watching the feed with eyes wide. No one could believe what they were seeing, except the woman flying it. On her third pass, Hannah heard a weak but unmistakable ping, a transponder beacon. It wasn't from a vehicle. It was from a radio, manually activated. She zoomed in. 5 heat signatures clustered beneath a rocky outcrop. Motionless. 2 barely registering body temps. They were pinned. 5 Marines confirmed. Visual on enemy squads closing in, 18 to 20 fighters. I'm marking extraction zone, but they won't last 10 minutes. Hannah had no air support, no wingman, and no extraction team. But she did have 1,174 rounds left. She slowed her approach, flying deliberately into fire, drawing attention. Her Warthog's reinforced body absorbed a few lucky hits, but she held the line. Then, flipping a custom toggle on her flight board, a personal modification, she activated Drop Run Alpha. The A-10 released 2 modified supply pods. Not bombs, gear. Emergency kits retrofitted with smokes, flares, and a lightweight drone that hovered over the Marines' location, deploying jammers to block enemy comms. Back under the rock outcrop, Sergeant Malcolm Barnes looked up in disbelief as the drone buzzed overhead, painting the area in red light. It dropped smoke and flares while the A-10 dove again. "She's doing it," Barnes whispered. "She's actually doing it." Using the smoke cover and suppressive fire from the Warthog, the Marines crawled from their cover. One was dragging another with a mangled leg. Another was bleeding from the shoulder. They moved with every ounce of strength they had left. The enemy fighters tried to reposition, but the A-10 circled relentlessly. From her cockpit, Hannah flipped to infrared. "Keep moving, boys. I've got you." She fired again, targeting a ridge just above the advancing hostiles. The explosion triggered a rockslide that scattered their line. It was chaos, but in chaos, there was opportunity. The Marines reached the designated clearing. Hannah hit her final switch. Out from her jet's belly, she dropped a beacon, one that would ping directly to an incoming medevac chopper now scrambling at the edge of the storm. Her comm crackled. "Hog 1, this is Angel 3, approaching from west. You sure it's clear?" Hannah looked over her shoulder. A second squad of enemy fighters was moving fast. "Not yet. But it will be." She angled the Warthog down into one last, impossibly tight spiral. Dust roared. The Marines were covering their heads. The enemy squad barely had time to raise their rifles. The Warthog's cannon lit up the night. By the time the dust cleared, the field was empty. Angel 3 landed moments later, skids slamming the ground. Medics rushed out, grabbing the wounded and hauling them in. From the sky, Hannah watched. Her fuel was low, her body aching, and her jet was half riddled with shrapnel. But they were alive. She called it in. Hog 1 to Watchtower. 5 souls extracted. Package secure. Returning home. In the control tower, Colonel Patterson finally exhaled. The room erupted in quiet disbelief. Some clapped. Others just stared at the screen. But Patterson leaned back, a heavy look on his face. "She pulled it off," he said. "Alone." A junior officer turned. "Sir, was she supposed to?" "No," he said. "She wasn't." And outside, as thunder echoed in the distance, the lone A-10 turned for home, scorched, scarred, and silent. But flying. Still flying. The skies roared with fury. Rain slammed against the canopy of Hannah Cole's A-10 like fists. Visibility was nearly zero. Thunder cracked above her, louder than the GAU-8 cannon she'd used hours earlier. But none of it mattered now. Her HUD flickered with static. Beneath her, the 5 stranded Marines were pinned in a ravine by enemy forces, small arms fire on both sides, and worse, a technical truck mounted with a heavy machine gun that had arrived during the storm. If it got a clear angle, they'd be wiped out. Hannah had made 3 runs already. Her last pass barely disrupted the enemy long enough for the Marines to reposition. Her fuel gauge flashed yellow. Her left engine had taken a hit from a lucky RPG fragment. She was almost out of time and options. Viper 2-1, this is Warlord. "Sitrep," came the gravel voice of the JTAC on the ground, strained through the comms. Hannah keyed her mic. "Warlord, I've got 1 clean run left." "Repeat, 1. Then I'm flying on hope and fumes." "Copy. We're about to be overrun. Make it count." She breathed in through her nose. Slow. Controlled. She scanned the layout below on her targeting screen. No drones. No support. Only her bird. "Cole," her AWACS controller's voice came in. "Winds are above tolerances. You won't get a second chance if you overshoot." "Noted," she replied, calm. Focused. Initiating final attack run. The A-10's engines roared defiantly as she dipped through the clouds and descended. Inside the ravine, the 5 Marines huddled behind rocks, their faces coated in mud and fear. Corporal Ramirez clutched the encrypted radio, his hand trembling. "She's coming back?" Private Monroe asked, voice cracking. Ramirez nodded. "She said 1 more pass." Sergeant Hall looked skyward through the mist. "She's got brass the size of tanks." They all ducked as another burst of gunfire cracked from above. The technical was repositioning. They had seconds. Hannah's fingers gripped the stick tighter. Her eyes flicked between her HUD and the terrain ahead. She could see the ravine's jagged lip, the smudge of shapes around it. The technical truck was moving, engine smoking, rotating the mounted gun. "Not today," she muttered. She clicked the master arm switch. The cannon armed. She toggled to her final cluster of 30mm rounds, precision mode. Targeting locked. She angled the A-10 into a dive. The wind screamed. The GS pressed against her chest like an iron fist. Her eyes watered from the pressure. She couldn't afford to flinch. In her mind, she thought back. She saw the training flights, the stares, the offhand comments about how a lady pilot belonged in transport, not tank busting. She thought about the first time she touched the A-10's throttle and felt something click in her bones. She had always belonged here. And now, she had 1 shot to prove it. The target marker blinked. "Gun's hot," she whispered. The GAU-8 erupted with a blast like the voice of God. Her rounds tore into the truck, splitting it like paper, metal, and smoke blooming in a single horrific bloom. Then she banked left, turning hard as more small arms fire tried to swat her down. She circled once to confirm wreckage. No movement. Enemy fire had ceased. The ravine was clear. The Marines scrambled from cover, one waving both arms in signal. "Target neutralized," came Ramirez's voice over comms, relief heavy. "I repeat, target neutralized." "Thank you, Viper 2-1. But Hannah wasn't done yet. Her engines were sputtering. Fuel level critical. And then, warning lights lit up across her dash. "Left engine flame out." "Come on, baby," she muttered, flipping switches, managing thrust balance. "Hold together a little longer." She pointed toward base. Then her right engine began to drop pressure. Back at the FOB, the runway team had already scrambled emergency crews. Colonel Briggs stood beside the tower, binoculars raised, jaw clenched. "She should have been back 5 minutes ago," he muttered. "She'll make it," said Major Tanaka quietly. "She's stubborn." Suddenly, on the far edge of the horizon, a silhouette broke through the gray. Low. Shaky. But flying. "The hell," Briggs whispered. Inside the cockpit, Hannah's vision swam. Her oxygen mix was off. Her speed was dropping below safe glide. Instruments failing one by one. She reached under her seat and tapped the photo clipped beside her knee board. Her brother, Army medic, lost years ago. She'd flown every mission for him. "You better be watching," she whispered. "I'm not done yet." She manually adjusted her flaps. The runway shimmered ahead like a lifeline. Every fiber of her being locked on it. She came in too fast. No auto-stabilizers. No thrust control. "Brace for hard landing," she muttered, her hands steadying. Her tires screamed as she hit the tarmac, bounced once, then slammed down. The nose gear wobbled, but held. The aircraft skidded, trailing sparks and smoke, but stayed upright. It stopped. Silence. Then the air filled with shouting. Medical crews rushed forward. Fuel techs followed. Colonel Briggs stepped up just as the cockpit canopy cracked open. Hannah Cole, drenched in sweat and storm grit, pulled off her helmet. Her brown hair clung to her face. Her eyes locked onto his. "Marines are safe," she said simply. Briggs stared, then nodded once, slowly. Hell of a landing. Hannah let out the breath she'd been holding for miles. Her knees finally began to shake. "You got guts, Captain," someone muttered behind her. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She had flown alone into the storm. And returned. The desert air was still. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky smeared with ash-colored clouds and a horizon painted gold by the rising sun. In the distance, the faint whine of jet engines faded into silence. They had all heard it before they saw her, an unmistakable sound, low and guttural, like thunder cracking open the heavens. The A-10 Thunderbolt II appeared through the heat shimmer, limping across the runway with a bent wing and scorched fuselage, one engine coughing smoke. Inside the tower, silence reigned. Every pair of eyes followed the battered aircraft as it touched down, its landing gear barely holding together. When it finally groaned to a stop, no one moved. Then the cockpit opened. Hannah Cole sat still for a moment, as if taking one last breath in the quiet. Her flight suit was streaked with sweat and sand, her helmet scratched, and her hands trembling slightly from adrenaline. But her eyes, those sharp brown eyes, were calm. Focused. She climbed out, slowly, her boots hitting the tarmac with a soft thud. Someone ran. Then another. By the time she reached the edge of the tarmac, a crowd had formed, mechanics, medics, officers, even the base commander. They didn't speak at first. They just stared. Behind her, the 5 Marines she had saved stood silently, dust-covered and bruised, but alive. One of them raised a hand in a quiet salute. A ripple of motion followed. One by one, they all saluted. And Hannah, standing there in the morning light, her body aching and her aircraft scorched, returned the salute with steady hands. No ceremony. No grand speech. Just that. Later, in the quiet of the hangar, Colonel Reeves approached her. He looked older than the day before, lines etched deeper by the weight of everything that could have gone wrong. "You weren't supposed to make it back," he said softly. She gave a tired smile. "Neither were they." He nodded, then stepped aside, revealing the newly requisitioned A-10 maintenance team already surrounding her aircraft. He looked at the battered jet, then back at her. "Maybe it's not the aircraft that's obsolete. Maybe we've just forgotten what some pilots are made of." In the days that followed, word spread, not just of the rescue, but of the woman who flew into a sandstorm alone, defied orders, and brought back 5 lives when hope had vanished. Across mess halls and hangars, her name was spoken with something close to reverence. And the A-10, once deemed too old for modern war, sat proudly on the tarmac again, scarred, but not broken. Just like her. If Hannah Cole's flight into the storm stirred something in you, if it reminded you of the quiet heroes we forget, the risks they take, and the courage they carry, then do us a favor. Tap that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.